Thanks, Dennis, very much for inviting SRI to present today, and for our partnership that we started last year is working in the right direction. We're already talking about some opportunities into the future, and this has really been working out quite well in a very complementary way. I hope you're all enjoying the afternoon. You know, one of the worrying issues about being a keynote sort of in the middle of the afternoon of the first day is whether all your information will have been preempted by the time you get up, or everyone's going in one direction and you're going in a different direction. Fortunately, I don't think that that's the case, although you're going to hear some themes from my presentation that we heard earlier this morning in a couple of the keynotes, and then as I was bouncing around to the different breakout sessions, I was hearing those as well. So it seems as though we do have some common themes going on here. The title of my presentation is Co-Creating Your Future, Partnering to Deliver Market-Driven Breakthrough Innovations. Here's the agenda that we'll go through over the next 35 or 40 minutes or so. First, Dennis did a quick intro. I'll do just a couple of slides or so on SRI. I won't belabor the point. Certainly you can go to sri.com and spend quite a bit of time on that if you'd like. But some of you may not know too much about SRI, so I'll explain that briefly. And then I'll just dive right into to a subject that's near and dear to us, is the disruption dilemma, and that's happening to all of us these days. Has been identified by a number of the speakers, but sort of our position on it and our perspective. And that moves us even further to an area that we sort of live and die by. Hopefully we live an awful lot. We're celebrating 70 years in business this year. The Valley of Death, from taking research, IP, and getting it all the way into society so that somebody out there can use it. I'll move then into how SRI actually co-creates with our clients, some of whom are in the room, and we have many across not just the US, but internationally, in our government and commercial areas and academia, and some actual case studies that I think you'll find interesting. Some of them are kind of fun. There are many more of these as well, but I tried to select a few of them that might be appropriate, and then a couple of concluding remarks. Okay, SRI, located in the heart, really, of Silicon Valley. As I mentioned, celebrating 70 years this year. We split from Stanford University. We used to be known as Stanford Research Institute, split from Stanford University back in 1970. We're now up to about 2,100 staff members, many PhDs, many master's degrees, and so forth. We're well over $500 million in competitive annual revenues. We get virtually no grants from the government. We have to compete against, in a sense, sometimes our customers, but we certainly compete against the largest organizations in the US for government contracts, as well as for commercial agreements as well. We do an awful lot of spin-outs. Dennis mentioned one called Siri. We did that some time ago, and I've actually got a little case study about that. We're doing about 5 to 8 of these per year now, about 60 plus over the last 20 years or so. In the last 10 years, we've done about $4 billion worth of research investment. So we think we know a bit about that whole area. Maybe some of you haven't heard too much about SRI, but you do use innovations from SRI just about every day. The computer mouse, of course, was invented around over 40 years ago. Siri, the technology developed because of the artificial intelligence platform that we built for DARPA, along with 28 partners, including Stanford University, USC, Oregon State, Carnegie Mellon, Boeing, and others. We took that technology and developed that into what became Siri. And as soon as we introduced it into the marketplace, Steve Jobs, before he passed on, decided that he had to have it be part of Apple and the iPhone. But we've also done some things like, you may know about the Da Vinci surgical robot, now called, the company is called Intuitive Surgical. Started at SRI and now has a market cap of well in excess of $20 billion. We've done things in and around drugs for cancer, the first cure for malaria. The first internet connection actually came by virtue of UCLA to SRI. We managed the .com, .gov, .org sites and domains. High-definition TV, so if you're watching sports on TV, think about SRI a little bit. And we won Emmys for that background technology. The word SWAT, there's a Trivial Pursuit game show question, came from SRI. And you might be wondering why Mickey Mouse is up there. We actually helped Walt Disney select Anaheim as the first place where a Disney location, Disneyland, would be located. So we do everything between, from computer mouse to Mickey Mouse. Some people say, and a lot of things in between. I don't know, it's a pretty bad joke. Okay, so we partner with really the most progressive organizations in the world. Here are some of the logos, but we have many, many more that we could show. In the lower right, you can see the National Science Foundation, NASA. Of course, DARPA is one of our largest clients, and NIH, et cetera. We do a lot of business with the government. It actually helps us out because as a not-for-profit, we're able to retain that technology and turn that around and work with companies like you to sort of get that technology out into society. I mentioned that we do lots of ventures. You can see some here, Intuitive Surgical. I don't know, some of you may know Nuance, which is the voice recognition technology that came out of SRI. If you're talking an airline reservation system or a hotel reservation system and so on. Tempo was a calendaring app that was sold to Salesforce.com, and there are many more. I'm going to highlight a couple of them a little bit later on. So that's kind of a quick spin on SRI. As I mentioned, there's much more at our site. Let me move now into the disruption dilemma, and I think got validated pretty much today that there's really no escaping it, whether you're a small company, a large company, or something in between. You're really up against it these days. Somebody was mentioning, maybe it was Chris earlier this morning, was talking about the Fortune 500, and there always will be, I guess, a Fortune 500 as long as there's a Fortune magazine. But being on this list really means nothing because where it used to be that you would last 60 years old or so on this list, now it's maybe 12 years and declining. And since 2000, how many of you knew that in the last 15, 16 years, over half of the Fortune 500 no longer are part of the Fortune 500? And this is, of course, called digital Darwinism, and people are talking about this an awful lot, and I suspect that a lot of CEOs in this group are thinking about this quite a bit these days as well. How many more will fail? Well, some surveys were done recently, as recent as last year, with C-level executives, and the title of this is "The Mighty Will Fail." And the question was asked, how many companies are going to lose their place in the top 10 in their industry due to digital disruption? And the average seemed to be about 3.7, or pretty close to 4 companies out of 10. So hopefully not anyone here of Lux's or our clients are in this batch, but that's what most of these C-level executives thought. Certainly some of the industries are on the lower end of this, the ones that have traditionally taken more time to see change occur, like the oil and gas industry or utilities, and at the high end, financial services and technology and so forth might be closer to 4, 4.5 or so, but that's what the assessment is of people who seem to be in the know. Where will these changes and how will this disruption take place? I guess if somebody had asked me that before I saw this graphic, I would have said, well, it'd be a lot of early stage companies. I myself have run a few early stage companies that have disrupted a lot of large businesses, and while it was somewhat terrifying, I guess, in the beginning stages, it became a lot more fun as we grew our companies and so forth, and the large companies didn't really know how to react. But it turns out that companies inside the inside your industries are most likely to be disrupting your companies more so than the break-ins. Once again, you see healthcare, utilities, oil and gas, and so forth, just because of the nature of their companies. And then you see others like telecom and media and entertainment and retail that might be disrupted, might have more of a chance with early stage companies. But whether it's early stage companies and these VC-backed companies, or it's faster moving large companies or SMEs, disruption is certainly happening. This is an interesting one about the pace of disruption. This shows the number of years it takes, or it took, for a particular technology to hit 100 million users. The telephone, how many were here back in 1878, took about 75 years or so to get to 100 million users. I'll flip down all the way through. The mobile phone was only about 15 or 17 years. iTunes, you can see, is less than 10 years. And how many have a WeChat account? Interesting. Probably in another year, we'll have half of this room, and maybe in another 6 months after that, just about everybody in the room. WeChat, I checked, it took something like 13 to 14 months to reach 100 million users. Anyone know how many users they've got, how many registered users they've got now? 1B as in billion users. That happens to be about 15% of the population of the world. How many outside the US? Excuse me, how many outside of China? Of course, it's very popular in China. You would think, okay, great big marketplace, they can really move rapidly. 100 million outside of China, as of, I think, about 6 months ago. Really moving very, very rapidly. I was just in Hong Kong and in Shenzhen and Guangzhou, and everybody is doing everything off of WeChat. Interesting. So sometimes even the disruptors themselves, or itself, are getting disrupted. WhatsApp, Skype, and a bunch of other similar services are expected, this is by virtue of Fortune magazine, are expected to drain over the 6-year period, 2012 through 2018, nearly $400 billion from global telecommunications companies. That's revenue going out the door that could be within these accounts. And these industries are trying to move as fast as they can, SMX, texting, and so forth, all these different services. But even they're being disrupted by new contestants in this race to drive for more market share and more applications and more services for consumers as well as for, of course, businesses. Now, some of you may know, in addition to being full-time president of SRI, I've had the fortune of being a lecturer over at Stanford's Business School, and I teach on doing high potential startups in developing economies. 40% of Stanford's Business School is from outside the US, and we have a number of students who want to go back to their countries and get going on a new project and so forth. Simon happens to be one of my students from just a few years ago, and he had an idea about providing loans to people, could be students, could be young adults, could be older adults, who want to simply borrow $500, $1,000, $2,000, and so forth, and they did not have any credit. There was no credit history. So they're sort of stuck in this catch-22 situation where Simon wanted to provide funding or financing for them, loan for them, but they in fact, they weren't sure, Simon wasn't sure whether it'd be a good credit risk or not. So it turned out that through various algorithms and a bunch of smart people, you can get your cell phone, you can give it to Simon, and within 1 minute, literally 60 seconds, he can tell you whether you'd be a good credit risk or not. And obviously it has a lot to do with GPS and a lot of the technology and a lot of the information that's stored already in your cell phone. In fact, that gives off a better risk profile of you than a credit bureau would. If I were a credit bureau these days, I don't know whether there are any in the room, I'd be very, very nervous about this technology, about providing. He's raised $50 million, he's raised $20 million in a Series A last year, and just while I was there, had just closed on a $150 million round from some fairly large investors who are attempting to disrupt this whole financial services industry. So I don't know whether this is ultimately the end of bricks and mortar as we know it in terms of banking, but certainly we talked a little bit about fintech today. That certainly is undergoing a lot of disruption. So we're clearly in the global innovation economy. One of the reasons for forging a relationship and a partnership that we hope lasts a long time with Lux is it's no longer driven simply by markets, and it's not just the technologists that are off to the side, but technology and markets are cohabitating quite much together. We are living in a world of abundance. We have 7.2 billion people on the planet, headed to 9.6 billion people, 28% growth over the next 35 years, of which 3 billion new will move into what I'll call the middle class or have a lot of discretionary spending. They're going to be wanting to spend it on innovations that all of us and our successors are trying to get out into the marketplace. So there are unlimited opportunities, and the rate of change, as many have seen this morning and early this afternoon, has been exponential. It is terrifying when you think about it. And of course, we have intense global competition as well, not just from new entrants, but a lot of venture capital-based companies, but also the ones that are large and trying to move pretty fast. Okay, that gets us to the Valley of Death, which seems to be getting deeper and deeper as people are trying to understand all the different technology trends. This is a little graphic that we've put together. It seems to be pretty popular. It shows the idea stage all the way through basic research, and then applied research, product development, and then ultimately into production. Of course, universities, not just in the US, but in the world, and national labs, and even startups, they're focused on idea generation, and then they get into research, and ultimately they are trying to get stuff out into society, but they just really don't know how. If you go to Stanford, there are a bunch of incubators around, but for the most part, you see more VCs walking around Stanford's campus these days, trying to grab a student from any one of the various engineering or other chemistry or biology departments and see if they'll want to join or even do a startup with them. Of course, companies are in the business of getting products out to their customers. Their customers could be consumers, their customers could be other businesses. I happen to think, this is more anecdotal, but I'd be interested in your comments maybe afterwards, that CEOs these days, feeling more and more pressure about earnings per share, are really not interested in long-term research projects. That's a drain on their earnings per share, and if you say that the average CEO these days is going to last maybe 3, 4, 5 years, not 10, 15 years, with some exceptions, then why should I, as a CEO, who probably will be around for 4 years, do a bunch of research and development, invest in some high-risk kinds of projects that ultimately my successor's successor may or may not have some success with. So I'm not so anxious to do that when I could either buy up some startups or do some other things and try to get more and more creative so that I could also deliver higher earnings per share given the pressure of analyst calls and so on. So we have this gap. It's called the Valley of Death, and I do think it's getting not just deeper but also broader. And that's an area that is easy to describe, as I've just done, but very, very difficult to navigate through. So why do companies fail so much in the Valley of Death? It's said that only 1% to 3% of patents ever make it out into society to be of any use for all of us. Well, first reason is they're just not equipped to deal with the Valley of Death. Most internal teams that we come in contact with have great skills, structure, and incentives, but they're designed for today's businesses and today's products and today's technology, not tomorrow's. So trying to adapt to tomorrow's can be rather chaotic and very difficult and challenging for companies and for heads of research and development organizations. We've also found that when people come to us from various companies and they talk about their disruptive technologies, when they really get away from what they're doing, they really understand that what they're doing is mainly incremental improvement. They think it's disruptive because they've been there for so long that any change seems to be pretty good, but it really is incremental. It's not going to move the needle that the CEO or the chief research officer is looking for in a company. And for the most part, what we've seen is a lot of advanced engineering or research arms really become more product support for the existing products that are going on. M&A transactions can be helpful, of course, but they can also form antibodies to innovation. There's this phrase that we hear about in Silicon Valley, maybe you all use it wherever you're located, culture eats strategy every day. And it certainly seems to be true with many M&A transactions failing. Big announcements in the newspaper, a lot of smiling executives, and then 6 or 8 months later, nothing really to show for it. So what worked before is not going to work again, and it wasn't even clear that what was trying to work before was actually working. So what can you do about it? Well, you got a variety of choices. If you're running a company or in the top tier in the executive team, or you're chief innovation officer or head of innovation for a particular business unit, you can go over to one of the great universities and hire a bunch of smart, new computer science or material science or chemistry or biology or pick an area, a bunch of graduates, and hope that they're smart enough to figure things out for you. You can move to upscale a little bit and buy a 20-person startup and hope that these 20 people are actually getting along pretty well. I've run a number of startups, but it doesn't necessarily come to pass that when you're talking to a startup about an acquisition, they're all going to be on their best behavior, and sometimes they're not on their best behavior when they get into a new company and we have these foreign antibodies and so forth kind of working against each other. But that's certainly a possibility. Many companies are doing that. You can really go upscale and take 50 or 100 or 200 million or maybe even $500 million of your cash and put it into a unicorn. And by that time, maybe the unicorn is really doing pretty well. Hopefully that unicorn is profitable, but maybe it's not, and maybe you don't care because that's going to move your stock price up or something. You've got to wonder whether that is really going to be a strategy that's going to be useful for you and whether the unicorn is ultimately going to eat your company or not. So you have to figure that one out. You can, of course, merge with one of your faster-moving competitors or with an adjacent industry company that seems to be moving in your direction or maybe potentially going to be hurting you in some way. Or you can find a proven and trusted innovation partner and maybe try to do business with that partner. Well, of course, SRI, I'd like to think, is a trusted innovation partner, and that's what the remainder of this talk is all about. I can't speak to the rest of those areas. Some of you have probably a lot more experience than I do. All I do is just read the newspapers like you all do about how these things can work out or not. So how do we work? How do we co-create with our clients amazing innovations that they actually put out into the marketplace? We actually like the impossible. We like challenging assignments. Our expertise is in crossing the valley of death. That's what we like to do. And we actually have a methodology, as you would suspect, and I'll try to give you a few tidbits. Normally we use 2 or 3 day workshops in and around our innovation processes and philosophy and methodology, and I'll just try to get this summarized into the next 5 or 10 minutes for all of you, and I'll be around afterwards if you'd like more information, or we can send some more information off to you. My Peter Marcatulio and Luann are here from SRI as well. So there are really 4 P's to think about: principles, process, platforms, and people. And I'll spend a little bit of time on each one. Principles being really the guiding principles of how we operate as a company. We think they're time-tested, not necessarily over 70 years, but quite a few years. But we keep them fresh, we keep them current, as you would expect for us to stay in business for as long as we have. We also have a process, which is also quite proven. I'm going to give you some case studies of that process. It's contextual with where our clients are. Many of you could be potentially our clients, of course. It's creative, but it's not a brainstorming session where everyone just sort of walks in without having thought through anything. It's really quite disciplined. Over the years now, we've developed technology and science-based platforms. We found that this is a real competitive advantage for us in that these platforms can be utilized together in some cases, as you'll see in some examples, or individually to move things forward. I think everyone would agree that the world is moving so fast that product cycles are just incredibly quick these days. And so we've got to be just as quick. We've got to be agile. We can't start with a research project that goes for 5 or 7 years any longer. And of course, we'd like to believe that we've got world-class people. Multidisciplined, I mentioned PhDs and master's degrees, but in a variety of science and engineering disciplines, mathematics. They're very business-oriented. They're motivated to get products out, help companies get products and technology out into the marketplace to do good things. And we like to think that they're battle-tested. They're under pressure all the time. This is our basic business. Okay, first, principles. Basic but critical. It's amazing to me how many workshops I lead. First question I ask is, please define innovation, disruptive innovation. 16 people in the room. I pass out some yellow slips and get them all back. We put them up on the board. Everybody's got a different definition of innovation. There are certain similarities and so forth, overlaps. But the question is that if the 16 top executives in a division or a company don't have the same definition, how can you expect your 5,000, 10,000, 100,000 people in your organization to have that? So basic but critical prep work before projects start. Simple things like definitions, vocabulary, and that sort of thing are really quite important. So we talk about, on the 4 or 5 principles we have, we talk about needs, future market needs. Again, this is where Lux, and we anticipate Lux coming in and helping us out quite a bit as we've been thinking through this. We have things like value propositions, not value propositions for today's market, but value propositions for into the future. Because, of course, we're designing things for the future, and it could be the near future, the next year, 2 years, 3 years, certainly not much longer than 3 or 4 years. We want to have an innovation champion. Like many smart VCs, we will not fund a project unless we have a very passionate, break through all the bureaucracy, innovation champion. VCs, when we talk about VCs fund people, they fund innovations or technology, and they fund big markets, but first and foremost, they fund great people, great entrepreneurs. We do the same thing within our company. These champions form fantastic teams, and the teams, since they have a common way of doing business, common methodology and vocabulary, they can be on teams very, very rapidly, come up to speed. And then we want to make sure that we have alignment. Alignment not only within SRI and our team, but alignment with our client. So we're having a lot of pre-meetings around what all these principles mean and making sure that the clients we have, they may have different terms, but we want to make sure that we have alignment. We then talk about our process, our lab to market ideation process. It starts off with understanding the strategic landscape of the client. We'll have our point of view. The client will have its point of view, because generally clients are big enough to have a strategy organization or an innovation organization or a strategic marketing organization or something along those lines, and identifying major market trends. Again, this is where we anticipate Lux helping us out. We then want to get to a customer needs statement. This is different from a market needs statement. Customer needs statement is our client, what do they actually want to accomplish? When we're all done with, we're working together and we've transferred technology over to them, what do they want to see as the end result? So we're always working toward that goal. With all this prep work involved, we then move into a pretty intense, generally 3-day ideation workshop. So we'll bring the team from the client in, we'll bring the team in from SRI, from various labs, of course, a facilitator, a whiteboard, a bunch of pizzas, as they say, and we'll go to work. And this is really where the magic happens, but it's all dependent upon all this great pre-work that's been done to anticipate what the various alternatives are, all in a very, very directed way. Not just free-flow brainstorming, but in a very, very disciplined manner. So we'll be creating technical solution concepts, scopes, budgets, timelines, and whatnot. And from that, we'll make 1 or 2 selections, and we'll figure things out from there, come up with more detailed proposals, and so on, and away we go. So one classic case study that I won't spend too much time on, but I'll just bring you into the Siri ideation workshop. This happened, now about 6 or so years ago. It wasn't a brainstorming session. This happened to be before Siri was even known. It was only known to the people in this room, and a lot of it was in and around what were we really trying to accomplish? What did we think the best alternatives were for the marketplace at the time? And these are the people. We had customers, potential customers in the room, and we had consumers, but we also had our own folks. We had technologists and so forth. Now, of course, when we have these ideation workshops, I love this quote, very often when you look for one thing, you oftentimes find something else from a Nobel Prize winner, and I've come to learn that there are a lot of great quotes from Albert. But we do find that there are some really interesting things that come out of these ideation workshops, and again, I'll share some of those with you in just a second. The third P happens to be technology platforms. We found that this, as I mentioned, has come to the fore as being one of the most important aspects because of the speed involved in getting technology out into the marketplace. They're building blocks that accelerate what our clients are looking for across multiple disciplines, tested with different applications. And of course, we've been refining them and reinventing them and creating new ones over time. And then people. We live in Silicon Valley for the most part. We've got 20 locations, but about 3/4 of our folks are in Silicon Valley, and we compete against all the best, startups, et cetera. So we've got to not just pay competitively, but we also got to challenge people, and that's what our folks really like. Okay, our business model. What is our business model? Well, I mentioned we're doing a lot of business with the government. Thanks to the Bayh-Dole amendment or agreement, we're able to retain the IP when we do a bunch of projects for the likes of DARPA or the DOE or NIH or NSF or whomever. So we can retain that IP, and then the government actually likes us to see if we can commercialize that, monetize that, if we can get that out to be used by the American public, because it's more about their R&D dollars or the public's R&D dollars being put to work, not just for the various agencies, but also for all of us as citizens. Then we can, and once we're doing that, we can turn that into R&D projects, therefore, for our commercial customers. We can license our technology. We have lots of patents that we license constantly. We can create new products, of course. They're really prototypes. We call them new products, but they're really not scalable in that form, but they're prototypes, so one of our partners can scale them up. And we like to do new ventures. Now, what I'm about to do is go through just a few examples, about 4 or 5 examples of real live subject matter of the previous slide, the different either ventures or R&D projects or what have you, and you can get a feel for how we work. First is a company called Yamaha Motors. I'm sure you've all heard of Yamaha Motors. Among other things, they make motorcycles. And we did, as I mentioned, a strategic landscape with Yamaha, and we uncovered this little factoid that motorcycle fatalities were actually a lot higher than automobile fatalities. Anyone know why? What's it? It's what? You die in crashes. Yes, that's true. Any other? Okay, so it turns out that Yamaha's market, as we discovered, has moved from the 18, 19, 20-year-old to the 45 to 50 to 55-year-old. And it turns out that the 45 to 50 to 55-year-old likes to believe that they have the same reflexes as the 18, 19, and 20-year-old. And that's not true. I found that out myself playing tennis, and I'm not about to get on a motorcycle right yet, but that's in fact what's causing that. So the motorcycle has sort of remained the same. In fact, some of the safety aspects of the motorcycle has actually improved. The problem is that we have a different type of driver these days. Of course, automobile fatalities, somebody said earlier this morning, are going to go down to 0, I guess, and we can anticipate that over a period of time because none of us are going to be driving. Okay, so that's one aspect, one tiny aspect that we looked at in our prep work. Then we went to Yamaha and said, what is your need statement? What do you want to see accomplished? They said, we want to build safer motorcycles, we want to increase our market share, and we want to be known as technology leaders in our space. Okay, those are great high-level goals. What can we do about that? So we went immediately then to a 3-day workshop. You can see a group over on the right-hand side, I think it's over on the right-hand side as you're facing it, of a combined SRI Yamaha team. That's a standard Yamaha motorcycle. Over on the left-hand side is essentially that same motorcycle. And you can see what looks like a robot or a robot rider kind of outlined there on the motorcycle. And one of the ideas that came up in this ideation workshop, once again very focused, is how about building a motobot? How about building a motobot and putting that motobot on a standard Yamaha bike? Don't do anything to the bike. And then how about racing the fastest motorcyclist in the world champion, someday in the not too distant future? And if you do that safely, do you think some of that technology could then transfer over into the bike? So that's in fact what we've been doing. And within 9 months, thanks to our platform technology, which included robotic platform technology, artificial intelligence, vision, virtual personal assistant, a bunch of different algorithms and so on, and our custom R&D in mapping this all together, we built an intelligent motobot applying our technology, and you see a picture of this. Now, time doesn't allow for me to go through, and I'd love to show you a YouTube version, but you can certainly do that at your leisure. There's a number of those out there. We introduced it together at the Consumer Electronics Show and met with a lot of, as you would imagine, a lot of oohs and ahs. We were able to get a proof of concept out immediately, pretty much immediately. So in the short term, big success. We're now in the midterm. We're testing without human risk. Okay, that's what one of the great insights into our ideation workshop is. Let's not put a human on a bike and put technology into the bike at first. Let's put a robot on the bike. And let's see what we can learn from all of that. Over the long haul, we're going to be transitioning this technology, as you can see, to Yamaha and getting it into production vehicles. Another example is SRI's Superflex. This just got announced last month. It's conformal robotic clothing, which reduces fatigue and enhances strength. Once again, this came by virtue of a DARPA project that we did. It's lightweight, low-cost, wearable robotics, which enhances physical capabilities. It's quiet. We were talking in one of the breakout sessions about the elderly and about how, they don't want to have kludgy things and so forth to draw attention to themselves. They'd rather have nice conformal material that's quiet and it is not obtrusive. Lots of healthcare applications for this particular clothing. You can see a boy over on the right-hand side who has muscular dystrophy. So that's partially funded by the MD Association along with a bunch of others. And the spin-out was announced very successfully with a number of VC involved. Now, on the surface, it doesn't look like maybe too much technology, but let me just explain a few things that are going on here. We've got different types of sensors, physiological sensors along with sensors for motion tracking. We've got high power, lightweight, efficient motors and controllers. We've got low power, low cost computer and battery packs. And of course, we've got a lot of algorithms, motion prediction, and so forth. This model, by the way, is is a part-time job for one of our robotics engineers. So a lot of stuff going on here. We think it's going to be a really successful startup, so look for it into the future, Superflex. Another new venture that we did in combination with a couple of very large companies, Johnson & Johnson and Google, is a company called Verb Surgical. Got this idea, of course, or they did, from Intuitive Surgical, which is idea with the robotics technology is to improve operating room experience. With new robotics tools that we're bringing on into the marketplace, we can integrate advanced imaging, data analytics, and analysis machine learning, and so on, and we can target a number of different general surgery procedures. We're doing things in biometrics, like Iris on the Move, which uses SRI's vision and AI platforms for this iPad-like Galaxy Tab Pro. So Peter Marcatullia was quite involved with this. The demands from Samsung, is anyone from Samsung here? Were pretty intense. It had to be compact, safe, secure, private, cheaper, faster, and easier to use, all within 18 months into production. So put a lot of pressure on our team. We love impossible assignments like that. It's now out in the marketplace. And we expect to be doing a lot more as biometrics really takes off. So the conclusion is that you no longer have the time. You need to find ways to de-risk your disruptive innovation process. This little graphic here shows customer value on the left-hand side with on the vertical axis with time on, going forward, time being equal to money. Of course, most projects, I would say, fail. They fail to meet expectations. They don't fail of and by themselves, but there's a lot of money pumped into projects that go on for a long time, and somebody declares success, but it's sort of so-so. If you got a customer focus, well, maybe you can achieve even more success, but that's going to take some time. In these days, you may actually miss the marketplace. What we'd like to do is have you or us, we use our own methodology. You may have yours, or maybe from this little presentation, you can get some ideas about finding some methodology that makes sense for you, that includes principles and process and platforms and people and definitions and vocabulary and that sort of thing. That'll get your team off quicker, more focused, more targeted toward high-value projects. As next steps, we all know that product life cycles are getting shorter. This has been mentioned constantly throughout. There are a lot of different reasons that people are talking about: faster information flow, faster development cycles, faster logistics, of course. Order it at 10 o'clock, get it by 4 o'clock. What does that imply for supply chain management and inventory management and so forth, and personal design? Worldwide competition, elevated expectations from not only consumers but from other businesses that we're doing business with. This whole area of digitization and data analytics, and of course, everybody's doing outsourcing in order to do things faster. In fact, we're a nice recipient of outsourced R&D. So navigating your company, as I conclude, in this new, very fast-moving innovation economy is ever challenging. You have many choices, as I described, and I'm not expert at, but acqui-hires, M&A, small consulting firms. Maybe you can teach your folks all the new ways of doing R&D and technology building and so forth, or you can partner up with an experienced innovator like SRI for what we like to believe as needle-moving, business-changing projects. Considering SRI as a business partner, we think makes a lot of sense. We have a lot of successes with our clients. You know that the status quo for your business, important point here, is actually riskier than reinventing yourself. Staying where you are is riskier than at least trying something different. Most of you, I think, are here because you know that. An innovation partner can help determine not only a new direction, which is helpful with a fresh pair of eyes, but also accelerate your way to the goals that you've got for your corporation. So you could be one of the 6 out of 10 that actually stay in the top 10 of your industry. And if you feel a need for a new approach, perhaps SRI, or for that matter, another innovation partner could make a lot of sense for you, especially if you're considering disruptive innovation projects. So thanks an awful lot. Dennis, thank you for allowing me to spend some time here and talk a little bit about SRI and our processes, and I'll be around afterwards if you want to talk with me or Peter or Luann. Thank you. I can take questions, sure, if you have time.
Any questions for Steve? One over there.
Could you tell us a little bit about the business model you have? Because you mentioned that SRI is a nonprofit, but at the same time you're able to go into JVs and you can also spin out parts of the technology you're building. So there is the potential for a lot of money coming. So it'd be great to hear your comments on that. The other aspect that I was very curious about is some of the fields that you get into are very high risk from a liability standpoint. So how, for example, are you able to deliver technologies, for example, in medical field for surgery or to the automotive area for safety and deal with potential liability issues coming back?
Okay, a couple of questions there. Talk a little bit more about our business model. Yes, we are a not-for-profit, and yes, we are also a not-for-loss. So we want to stay in business for another 70 years. When we do business with the government, many of you probably do business with the government, they will pay your cost. They will pay not much more than your cost. So trying to eke out a profit with our federal government is really not in our cards and what we anticipate. So we get a couple of things from doing business with our friendly government agencies. We do get our costs reimbursed, of course, which is important, and we also get technology that we can use. So what we're after is a much more profit-oriented objective, which we're able to do with as long as it's a smallish part of our business, not the majority of our business, and that is work with commercial customers, international customers, and so forth, and be able to do something amazing for them, and in turn, we can reap some of the rewards from that. We, as a not-for-profit, many of you probably don't know, we actually can own, operate for-profit subsidiaries. That's very legal to do, and we're happy to do that, but they have to be very much subsidiaries, and they can't be part of our ongoing business. So we can create new ventures, and we own a significant portion of Siri, for example, or Nuance, or Intuitive Surgical. The ones that I just mentioned, we own a significant portion. We sit on boards, help those companies grow, and so forth. Insofar as some of the areas that we get into, just about every area now is somehow regulated. We have, over the years, developed a lot of, in Silicon Valley and other places, a lot of consultants who can help us move forward. For the most part, the companies that we do business with have great relationships and great understanding of safety or government regulatory issues and so forth, and they're just happy for us to develop whiz-bang type technology, and we let them sort of help us and shepherd us through various processes if we need to. But thank you for the questions. Yes?
Thank you for your talk. There was, I guess a couple of years ago, a pretty famous Brookings study about technology transfer and licensing strategies from universities saying that the Bayh-Dole Act didn't necessarily do what is intended to. A lot of universities form technology transfer offices, and they can't even cover the cost of the lawyers and people to staff them. So Stanford Research Institute seems to be the exception to that. So when you're licensing out technologies there, how are you creating these win-win situations there that seems to be different than the way a university does it or another research institute does it?
Okay, so we're fortunate, Stanford Research Institute, or SRI, is very fortunate that we've been in the business of doing these kinds of things for quite a while, and we've developed a very strong SRI Ventures organization combined with our own business development organization, not run by attorneys. No offense to any attorneys here, but the business unit are run by business. We do have attorneys and a general counsel in our company. But for the most part, what we find when universities come to us and ask for some help because they're stymied, it tends to be that either a researcher or an attorney or a lawyer is running the tech transfer office, TTO, as it's normally called, and it's not really run nearly as a business. And they have virtually very little technology that is available to be licensed. Remember that our researchers are very oriented to applied research and about getting stuff out into the marketplace. We're orienting, as soon as a new PhD comes into our company, that's how he or she is being oriented. And matter of fact, there's even financial incentive to do that. At most universities, researchers are not oriented that way. It's academic research, it's basic research. So when a company tries to determine whether something is licensable, it may take 2, 3, 5, 7 years to put that in the kind of shape that it can actually be put into a product. So, yeah, so we're a lot more tech ready than the universities are now coming to us, asking us to see if we can help them, and in some cases run their TTOs. Yes.
Hi, I wanted to ask you about that valley of death, because it seems like that's both a technology problem and also just a plain financial problem. Moving from something that has gone from proof of concept to actual commercialization can be an enormous barrier. And I know there were at some point some notions about doing having some kind of like a bank, a government bank that would help with some of that. And I'm just wondering how companies manage the valley of death from a financial point of view, that big scale up.
Ooh, tough question. So how do companies manage the valley of death? So I think you bring up one point that I didn't really address, and thankfully we don't have to worry about too much at SRI, and that is, those of you who know who've been around ventures, is it's one thing to do a new product based upon a new technology, but most VCs know that it takes 3 or 4 times as much money and even higher risk to actually get it out into the marketplace. The whole marketing, distribution channel, supply chain, and so forth changes constantly. So not only is it, we're here talking about real R&D, and of course that's what we spend our time worrying about, but when we talk to other people in these companies, they've got to find a whole new way of doing business. Even if their product that we help create for them is ready, is their channel ready? Do they need a whole new channel? Do they need to buy a channel? Do they need to figure things out very, very differently? So it's something to consider. I wish I had the answer to your question. I don't know about a bank that is being set up or helping some of these companies. It's a real tragedy to see 52%. That's over 250 of the Fortune 500 companies go away or somehow get acquired or what have you. An awful lot of jobs are involved and people dedicating their careers and just missing one cycle, one technology cycle or one distribution cycle, and you're shunned to the side. Okay, well thank you very much again. I appreciate it. I'll be around, as will Peter and Luann. Thank you.